At 44, I never thought I'd find myself in bed with a woman 2 decades younger, especially out of revenge. Life has a way of surprising you. Just when you think you've seen it all, it throws a gut-wrenching curveball. But before I get too far ahead, let me backtrack a bit and introduce myself. My name is Sam, your average middle-aged guy. Nothing remarkable to note until recently. I've been married to Melissa for 16 years. We met in our late 20s when I was more hopeful and had fewer grey hairs. She was the type of person who could brighten any room, making everyone feel special, and that made me feel lucky to have her. Our marriage was far from perfect, but whose is? We had our ups and downs, but I never thought we couldn't handle them. We weren't the lovey-dovey couple and had our share of arguments, but we always found our way back, or at least I thought we did. Now I realize I was just a naive husband who believed that everything would be okay if we just pushed through. Then there's Jason, my so-called best friend. We've known each other for nearly 2 decades, ever since we first worked together. He's been through a lot, lost his wife in a car accident about 10 years ago, leaving him to raise his daughter Emma, who was only 10 at the time. I remember how shattered he was that first year, barely managing to get by. Melissa and I supported him through it all, especially Melissa. She took on a nurturing role with Emma, almost as if she were trying to fill the gap left by Jason's wife. Emma spent a lot of time at our house, practically growing up there, and she called me Uncle Sam. She confided in me about things she wouldn't share with her dad, like typical teenage issues, boys, school, and all that. To her, I was more like an older brother. Jason seemed grateful, or at least I thought he was. We lived nearby, and they often visited without warning, like family. Jason was practically a part of our home, but I never imagined that this familiarity would lead to something far more sinister. One day, everything fell apart. I wasn't supposed to be home that day. I was at work, going through the usual routine, when a sudden sharp pain hit me. My boss, being a decent guy, told me to take the rest of the day off. I planned to go home and rest, but I never made it to my bed. When I pulled into the driveway, Jason's car was there, which wasn't unusual since he often dropped by. But something felt off, call it intuition or paranoia, but I knew something was wrong. The front door was locked, which was odd because Melissa never locked it during the day, especially when guests were over. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the house was eerily quiet. Then I heard it soft at first, but unmistakable, the sounds of moaning and hushed voices. My heart sank. I couldn't believe this was happening. My legs moved on their own, taking me upstairs faster than I could think, grabbing a bat from the closet along the way. I knew I was about to confront something I couldn't unsee. When I reached the bedroom door, I hesitated before pushing it open, and there they were, my wife of 16 years straddling my best friend. They froze at the sight of me, bat in hand, their faces drained of color. Melissa's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jason scrambled off the bed like a terrified rat. I didn't say a word. I simply walked up and slammed the bat to the floor, hard enough to crack the wood. Jason flinched, but I wasn't aiming for him, at least, not yet. The betrayal was written all over their faces. Melissa, always the manipulator, finally spoke. Sam, wait, don't do anything stupid. Let's talk. Talk? After this? I dropped the bat and punched Jason square in the face, then again and again. Blood dripped from his split lip as Melissa screamed, trying to pull me away, but I was too far gone to care. What the __ man, Jason finally blurted out, his eyes wide with panic. Sam, it's not what it looks like. How long? I growled, my voice trembling. How long has this been going on? Neither of them could answer, and it was pathetic. I didn't wait for any excuses. I stormed out, bat in hand, and slammed the front door behind me. Outside, I swung the bat into Jason's car, shattering the windshield, denting the hood, and smashing the side mirrors. All I could think was, how the hell did it get to this? I jumped into my own car and drove off with no clear destination. It wasn't long before I realized what I needed: a drink. No, I needed to get completely hammered. So I drove to the bar, the one place where things always felt right, where the world wasn't so twisted. I walked in, still clutching the bat like it was the only thing holding my shattered life together. The usual crowd was there, nursing their drinks, lost in their own issues. I didn't say a word as I sat at the counter, but I could feel their eyes on me. It's not every day you see a guy like me show up at noon, looking like he'd just been through hell. Whiskey, I mumbled, not even glancing up at the bartender. I didn't need to, he already knew. Gary was his name. Good guy, Had seen a lot in his time at that bar, always there with a joke or some advice, depending on what you needed. He didn't ask questions, he just poured the whiskey and set the glass in front of me. I downed it in one gulp, the burn barely registering. By the time I ordered my third glass, Gary leaned in a little closer, raising an eyebrow. "Everything all right, Sam?" "Not like you to be here before sundown." His voice was calm, like he'd heard every sob story in the book, but there was a trace of concern there too. Nobody had ever seen me like this, not in all the years I'd been coming to this place. I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. "You ever walk in on your wife _ your best friend?" Gary's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't seem shocked, more like he'd heard it all before. "Damn," he said, letting out a low whistle. "That's rough, man." "Rough doesn't even begin to cover it," I muttered, swirling the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. I stared at it, hoping it might offer some kind of answer, some clarity, but it didn't. Nothing made sense. I'm not sure why I told him everything. Maybe it was the booze, or maybe I just needed to let it out before it ate me alive. But I did. I told him about catching them, the look on their faces, the sound of the bat hitting the floor. I told him about smashing Jason's car, the punches, and how it felt like my whole world had been ripped apart. Gary listened without interrupting. When I finished, he gave my shoulder a reassuring pat, his hand heavy but comforting. "That's a _ situation, man. No other way to put it." I nodded, staring at the empty glass in front of me. _ doesn't even cover it. "But listen," Gary continued, leaning in closer. "The main thing is, don't break down. Don't let them win." I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words. "What would you do if you were me?" Gary didn't hesitate. "Me? I'd probably do what you're doing now, get drunk and maybe break some stuff. But more than that, I'd want revenge. The kind that leaves them with nothing. Take everything from them, your wife, your so-called friend. Make them regret ever crossing you." I stared at him, his words hitting me harder than any drink. Revenge. That's what I wanted, wasn't it? To make them suffer, to tear their lives apart like they had torn mine. "I'll do it," I said, my voice low but determined. "I'm going to take them down. Leave them with nothing." Gary nodded in approval, but his expression softened. "Just be smart about this, Sam. You're a good guy, don't let this change who you are." By the time hours had passed, I was so drunk I could hardly see straight. I had no idea how I was going to get home, and honestly, I didn't care. I was too wrapped up in my thoughts, drowning in whiskey and anger. Gary must have seen it coming, because before I could even think about staggering to my car, he reached over the counter and snatched my keys. "You're not driving anywhere, Sam. Pick these up when you're sober." I opened my mouth to protest, but I knew I was in no state to argue, so I just nodded and slumped back onto the stool. "Taxi's on the way," Gary said, already on the phone. When the cab arrived, I barely managed to get into the back seat without falling over. The driver didn't say a word. Thankfully, he just drove while I stared blankly out the window, watching the city blur past like it wasn't even real. I don't remember much after that, just stumbling through the front door of my house, the place where all this started. It felt empty, like a hollow shell of the life I once had. I collapsed on the couch, still fully dressed, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up with the worst hangover of my life. My head felt like it had been run over by a truck, my mouth was dry, and every muscle in my body ached. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. By the time I dragged myself off the couch that afternoon, my head was still pounding, but I couldn't afford to wallow. I knew what had to come next. The divorce wasn't going to sort itself out. I grabbed my phone and called the first divorce lawyer I could think of, a guy named Rick I'd met at a work event years ago. We'd chatted occasionally, and I knew he handled messy situations like mine. "Rick, it's Sam. I need to talk about a divorce," I said flatly, not in the mood for small talk. "Damn, Sam, I didn't expect this call," Rick replied, sounding surprised but sympathetic. "All right, give me the rundown." I laid it all out. "Melissa, the cheating, our years of marriage." I didn't hold back. Rick needed to know everything if I wanted to make sure Melissa didn't walk away with anything. When I hung up, I felt a little better. That's when I noticed Melissa's work laptop on the dining table. She had a big presentation the next day that she'd been stressing about for weeks. It was a crucial moment for her career, and suddenly, an idea hit me, a way to make her life just a bit more difficult. I sat down and opened her laptop, skimming through her files until I found the presentation. I wasn't a tech expert, but I knew enough to mess with it. I scrolled through the slides, looking for the perfect spot to strike, and then I had it. Melissa's meeting was with executives from a Korean company, so I did a quick search online and found some offensive material that would rub them the wrong way, subtle enough to cause embarrassment, but hidden just enough to avoid early detection. I slipped it into the middle of her presentation. I also added a few inappropriate images, placing them strategically toward the center of the slides, not too early where she'd noticed during a quick scan, but just far enough in to catch her off guard at the worst possible moment. I wasn't just aiming to ruin her marriage, I wanted to shake her entire world. My head was still throbbing, so I took some painkillers and lay down. By the evening I felt a bit better, just in time for Melissa to come home. She walked in as if nothing had happened, probably thinking she could smooth things over like always. "Sam, we need to talk," she started, her voice calm but edged with that tone I'd grown to hate. Without even looking at her, I snapped, "Go to hell, Melissa. We're getting a divorce." She didn't flinch. "You're a fool," she spat, crossing her arms, probably thinking I'd calm down eventually, like this was just another argument about bills or dinner plans. "We'll see who the fool is," I shot back, standing up and heading out to the porch. I had nowhere to go, and neither did she, but that night, the house felt more like a prison than ever. There was no way I'd sleep next to her, so I decided to crash on the couch again. But I didn't even make it through the night at home. It was a few hours past midnight when my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was another spam call, but then I saw the name Emma, Jason's daughter. I answered, groggy. "Hello?" Her words were slurred and jumbled, but after a moment it was clear she was drunk, really drunk. She'd been at a party and couldn't get home, so she'd called me, of all people. She didn't want her dad to find out, and I guess I was the only person she trusted. So I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed out. When I pulled up to the address Emma had given me, she was slumped against a wall, barely able to stand. The stench of alcohol hit me before she even stumbled toward the car. I opened the door, and she practically fell into the passenger seat. "What the hell?" "Emma," I said, my tone more worried than angry. "This isn't like you." She waved me off, her head leaning against the seat. My boyfriend. He cheated on me," she mumbled, on the verge of tears, but with a strange, drunken smile on her face. She was a mess drunk, emotional and confused. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. I knew exactly how it felt to be betrayed. "You're not the only one who's been let down," I said, keeping my focus on the road. She turned toward me, her drunken curiosity piqued. "Who else?" she asked. I sighed and briefly told her about Melissa and Jason. I spared her the worst details, but it was enough for her to understand. "Oh, Uncle Sam," she whispered, leaning closer as her hand landed on my leg. "I'm so sorry." At first I thought she was just trying to be comforting, but her hand didn't stop. It slowly moved up and down my leg, and I felt myself tense up. "Emma, stop," I said, grabbing her hand and pushing it away, but she didn't. She continued, her drunken flirtation now unmistakable. "I want to make you feel better," she whispered, her hand finding its way back to my thigh. I tried to resist, I really did, but the anger, the betrayal, and the alcohol all mixed together in my head. At some point I just stopped caring. Maybe it was the need for revenge, or maybe it was the alcohol talking, but when she unzipped my fly and leaned in, I didn't stop her. She was good at it, and for a moment Melissa and Jason were the furthest things from my mind. When she finished, she leaned back, smiling with her lipstick smeared and her makeup a mess. "There's a hotel nearby," she said, her voice low and suggestive. "You don't want to go home, and neither do I." I didn't argue. We went to the hotel and spent the rest of the night in bed, doing things I never thought I'd do with Emma. I was 44, but that night age didn't seem to matter somehow. I kept up. The next morning, she woke me with a grin. "Let's take a picture," she said, grabbing my phone since hers was dead. For reasons I can't explain, I let her. She posed, her makeup smeared, and I snapped the photo, her lipstick still on my skin. Afterward, we fell back into bed, and by morning, when the hangover hit again, reality came crashing down. I felt like I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I didn't regret it, but I knew things were only going to get messier from here. Stepping out of the hotel into the sharp morning light felt surreal. It was one of those mornings where everything should seem normal, but the weight of what had happened hung in the air like a storm cloud. Emma broke the silence first, lighting a cigarette and exhaling a long stream of smoke, completely unfazed. "You know," she said casually, as if talking about the weather. "You could show that picture to my dad." I stopped mid-step, staring at her. "What?" She took another drag, glancing at me with a grin that didn't match the seriousness of her words. "I mean, you could show him that picture of me." "I don't give a ___ anymore." I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around what she was suggesting. "Why the hell would you want me to do that?" Emma shrugged, still smirking like it was all some kind of twisted game. "I've been wanting to get away from him for years. He won't let me go. Every time I talk about moving out or having my own life, he gives me the whole 'you won't survive without me ___. I'm sick of it, Sam. Maybe if he sees that picture, he'll finally get it. Maybe he'll let me live my life." I just stared at her, absorbing the gravity of her words. This wasn't some spoiled rebellion. This was years of feeling trapped under Jason's thumb, suffocated by her own father. She was ready to use me, to use what we'd done, to blow her life apart if it meant she could finally escape. "I'm not going to do that," I said, but the truth was the thought had already crossed my mind. It was just another way to get back at Jason, another way to burn everything to the ground. "Suit yourself," she said, flicking her cigarette butt into the gutter. She didn't seem to care either way, as if the consequences didn't matter anymore. "But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." I dropped her off at her house, and we didn't say much for the rest of the drive. Her words echoed in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo, the image of her makeup smeared, her lipstick still staining my skin. It was like a ticking time bomb, ready to blow everything apart. And part of me craved that explosion. I wanted to destroy every bridge, to leave nothing but ashes behind. When I got home, I felt the tension even before I stepped inside. Melissa's laptop was still on the dining room table, a silent reminder of the revenge I'd set in motion. She had no idea what was coming. Her big presentation that could make or break her career was now a disaster waiting to happen. And I didn't have to wait long. Melissa came home just before dinner, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the walls shook. She didn't even glance at me, her face twisted with raw fury. Before I could get a word out, she hurled her laptop across the room. It smashed against the wall, the screen shattering into pieces as it hit the floor. "You ___ idiot," she screamed, her voice strained and hoarse with anger. "You did this, didn't you?" I stayed on the couch, just watching her with a calm I didn't actually feel. "Maybe," I replied. She stormed toward me, her face red and her eyes wild. "You sabotaged my presentation, you ___. Do you even understand what you've done?" I didn't flinch. "Yeah, I know exactly what I did." Her hands were shaking, and for a second I thought she might actually hit me. "They fired me, Sam. I got fired in front of everyone." "Do you have any idea what that means?" "No company's going to touch me now. I'm finished." I just raised an eyebrow. Good. Her scream was a mix of rage and desperation, and she grabbed a chair, throwing it aside. "You ruined me. You ruined everything. And for what? To get back at me? Well, ___ you, Sam, because guess what? I've been ___ Jason for years. We didn't even wait after his wife's funeral. You were too stupid to see it." That hit me like a punch in the gut. I had expected betrayal, but the timeline, the fact that they started right after his wife's funeral, felt like a whole new level of cruelty. My stomach twisted, and I felt bile rise in my throat. How could I have been so blind, so clueless for so long? They were messing around while I was grieving with him, supporting him through his loss, and all the while they were betraying me behind my back. I stood up, fists clenched at my sides. "Go to hell, Melissa," she stormed off, slamming the bedroom door, and just like that she was gone from my life, at least for the moment. But I wasn't done, not even close. I sat back down, my mind buzzing from everything that had happened. That's when I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages until I found Jason's name. My finger hovered over the picture of Emma for a moment before I hit send. The image of her smeared makeup, the look on her face, was now on its way to him, the final nail in the coffin. I didn't care about the fallout. I just wanted him to feel the pain, the betrayal, the chaos that had swallowed my life. 15 minutes later, Jason's car screeched to a halt outside my house. He didn't even bother to knock. The door flew open, and he stormed in, his face twisted with rage, fists clenched at his sides. "What the ___ is this? Sam," he yelled, holding up his phone with the picture of his daughter staring back at me. I didn't even get up. What the underscore do you think it is? That's when he lunged at me, his fist connecting with my jaw, knocking me back. But I swung right back at him. Then I heard the sirens. 10 minutes later, the cops busted down the door. One of the neighbors must have seen us fighting through the window and called them in. They separated us, dragging us to our feet and out to the squad cars. I spent the next few hours at the station, mostly sitting in silence. Neither of us pressed charges. We were too drained, too beaten to keep fighting. Eventually, they let us go with just a warning. When I got home that night, something strange settled over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter, not better exactly, but there was something about finally releasing all the pent-up anger and pain that had been eating me alive. I didn't care about Melissa, Jason, or Emma anymore. They could all go to hell for all I cared. In the end, maybe I was the one who had set fire to everything, but after all that had happened, I was okay with that. Sometimes the only way to survive is to burn everything down and walk away from the ashes. Melissa and I split up faster than I thought we would. After all the chaos, there was nothing left to save. There was no point in dragging it out, no love, no trust, just a hollow feeling where our marriage used to be. It was like watching a building burn to the ground and realizing halfway through the fire that there was nothing worth saving. We signed the divorce papers, split up our assets, and went our separate ways. A few months later, we sold the house. That place had once meant everything to us, our home, where we'd planted our future, argued over trivial things, and even made some good memories. But after all that had happened, it felt more like a tomb, the walls echoing with the fights, the betrayal, and that final, ugly collapse. I was relieved when it sold. It meant I could finally close that chapter and move on. We both relocated to different places. I found a modest apartment on the other side of town, nothing special, but it was mine, and it felt like a fresh start, something I could control. I didn't care where Melissa ended up, as long as it was far away. That was all I needed, knowing there was no chance of running into her at the grocery store or any of the places we used to go. We both needed space, and now we had it. Emma, though, surprised me. After we parted ways, she really took control of her life. She moved out of her dad's house, landed a good job in another city, and started building her own life. I was oddly proud of her. We still talk sometimes, just casual chats, nothing heavy. She checks in on me every now and then, and I do the same. It's strange, though we haven't seen each other in person since that night at the hotel, and I think we both know that's for the best. I never intended to keep that going. Whatever happened between us was a one-time thing, driven by anger and alcohol. We both needed an escape that night, but I wasn't looking to make it more than that. Some things are better left in the past. Melissa, on the other hand, didn't land on her feet so gracefully. The fallout from her botched presentation spread quickly. Word got around in her industry, and no one wanted to take a risk on her after that. Getting fired was one thing, but the rumors, the stories about what happened in that boardroom left her blacklisted. She tried finding work, but nothing stuck. I heard she bounced around a bit, but no company would touch her. No one wants to hire someone who embarrassed themselves in front of a room full of executives. What really got to me was hearing about her and Jason. After everything blew up, they tried to make it work. Maybe they thought they had nothing left to lose, since they'd already destroyed their marriages. But a relationship built on lies can't last. The spark they had while sneaking around behind my back fizzled out quickly when they had to face each other in the daylight. From what I heard, things went downhill fast. They both started drinking heavily. It became a nightly routine, just the two of them in a toxic cycle of booze and bitterness. I guess they thought alcohol could help them forget, but it only made things worse. When you start drinking to drown out your problems, the only thing you end up drowning is yourself. It didn't take long for their relationship to implode. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that it all came to a head one night when they had a terrible fight, worse than usual. Jason hit her, bad enough that she ended up in the hospital, and he landed in jail. I don't know if she pressed charges, but he did time for it. I never asked for the details. I didn't care enough to find out. They got what was coming to them, one way or another. But as for me, life began to look up. It wasn't a straight path to happiness, but slowly things started to improve. I've always thought I could handle things on my own, that I didn't need help. But after everything that happened, I realized I couldn't carry all that weight by myself. The anger, the betrayal, the guilt, it was like a poison inside me, eating away at who I was. So I swallowed my pride and started seeing a psychologist. It wasn't easy at first, sitting there and spilling my guts to someone who didn't know me, didn't know what I'd been through. But after a few sessions, I realized I needed it. I needed someone to help me unpack all the underscore I'd buried. It was like lifting a weight off my shoulders I didn't even know I was carrying. I also went back to the bar. Gary, the bartender, had been there for me from the start, even if he didn't know the whole story. One night after a few drinks, I finally told him everything about Melissa and Jason, about Emma, about the picture, the fight, all of it. I half expected him to judge me, to look at me like I was some kind of monster, but he didn't. He just listened, nodding along like he'd heard it all before. When I got to the part about sending Jason that picture of his daughter, Gary let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Man," he said, pouring us both a shot of whiskey, "that's one hell of a story. We clinked glasses and drank, and after that we laughed about it, not because it was funny, none of it really was, but because sometimes that's all you can do. You laugh because if you don't, the weight of it all will crush you." Looking back on everything, I've wondered more than once if I did the right thing. Was all the revenge worth it? Did it fix anything? No, probably not. But at the same time, it gave me closure in a way I didn't think I'd ever find. Melissa and Jason got what they deserved. Emma found her own way out, and me? I'm still standing. So to everyone who stuck around to read this, thanks. I needed to get it off my chest to tell the whole story from start to finish. Life's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, but you deal with it, you move forward, and if you're lucky, you learn something from it. Did I do the right thing? I don't know, maybe not. But in the end, I'm still here, and I'm still here, and I'm still moving forward. That's got to count for something, right? Good luck out there, folks. Life's underscore, but sometimes you just have to laugh and keep going.